Hey guys, I'm Dave, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of Debt Free Differently. Today, I want to talk a little bit about budgeting and also share a system that I've literally been using since I was 14 years old, and it has worked for me ever since. If you've read up on some budgeting techniques, you're likely familiar with the envelope strategy, where you take cash, separate it into different envelopes with names on them, and you use that cash to cover all of your expenses until the next time you get paid. So let's say you had 500 bucks and you were doing the envelope strategy. It would look something like this. You take 250 bucks and set it aside for your groceries, maybe 100 for your utilities, 50 for internet, 50 for gas, 25 bucks for your cell phone, and maybe another 25 for a meal out with friends. It'd be something like that. But the point of it is you only get to spend what's in the envelope, and the name on the front of the envelope is the only thing you can spend that money on. But guys, it's 2020. There's a more automated way to do this, and especially these days, a lot of businesses prefer not to take cash. So I'm going to introduce you guys to what I've been using for over 20 years, what I call the electronic envelope strategy. And of course, if you like this video or learn something new, give it a like, subscribe to my channel to keep learning how to pay off debt, manage your money, and even build wealth a little bit differently. Let's get right into it. When you're doing the electronic envelope strategy, your checking account where your regular paycheck gets deposited acts as what I like to call the feeder account. And then you open up different savings accounts which act as your envelopes. Depending on where you bank, you might actually be able to set up your own electronic envelope system without changing banks. A lot of banks nowadays allow you to open up multiple free savings accounts that link to your checking account. If you want to stay with your current bank, make sure that the savings accounts don't come with minimum balance requirements or any monthly fees. Like a traditional envelope strategy, these envelopes, these savings accounts, are meant to be drained, sometimes all the way to zero, so you want to make sure that you're not charged for that. With all savings accounts, you can transfer your money out 6 times per month. If you plan your envelopes correctly, you shouldn't really have any problem with that limit. And if you have to change banks, while changing banks can seem scary, it's often not as bad as you think. 2 banks that I've found are pretty easy to set up the electronic envelope strategy with online are Ally and Capital One. So if you already bank with either of those, awesome. If not, they're worth checking out. So after you find your bank, let's start setting up those envelopes. First, you have to figure out what envelopes you're going to need. Here are just a few of ours. We have car maintenance, car insurance, mortgage, groceries, rental house maintenance, dog stuff, childcare, utilities. The list goes on and on and on. You might have 10 envelopes, you might have 20. I think we probably end up having between 15 and 20 on a regular basis. So after you have your list of the envelopes that you need, you open up savings accounts and add names to them to apply to each one of these categories. And then it's time for a little bit of math. You figure out how much money you need in that envelope and what you're going to have to do to make sure that envelope has the money that you need when you need it. Taking your pay schedule into account, you set up recurring transfers from your checking account where your paycheck gets deposited and transfer the money into each of your envelopes to make sure that you have what you need in each of them. So in my case, I get paid every 2 weeks, so my money that I get on my paycheck is actually only in my checking account for about 24 hours before it gets distributed into all of my envelope accounts. So if you get paid every 2 weeks, you might transfer something like $150, maybe $200 from your checking account into your grocery account. And then you might have another envelope for something like car maintenance where you can do a smaller amount. So let's say it's $15 every 2 weeks. That will cover you for oil changes, regular maintenance on your car, and just kind of random things like if your battery dies one day, at least you'll have a nice cushion. The envelope strategy also works for longer term things like car insurance. So let's say your bill is $1,000 a year and somehow you always end up being surprised by a bill that arrives at literally the exact same time every year. So instead of not knowing how to pay it or going into debt to pay it, you've been putting aside $50 every 2 weeks for the whole year. So when the bill comes around, you already have money and you can pay it off with no stress at all. When you get started with this, you might find that you have to do some adjusting week to week to really get it right and dial it in. When you use any new budgeting strategy, it can usually take about a month, maybe 3 months to really get it right and locked on. And that's totally okay if you have to make some changes along the way. This is a living, breathing thing. After you set up all of your recurring transfers, I would highly recommend adding all of them up just to make sure that you are not actually transferring more money out of your checking account and into your envelopes than you have coming in from your regular paycheck. If you find that you're in the negative, this is a good time to do some adjusting on those transfers to see if you can cut a little bit here or there, reprioritize things, or you might want to look at some side jobs. And I've done a whole video on side jobs that we use to make $50,000 in a year, and I'll link to that video somewhere. By setting up your envelopes and also setting up your recurring transfers, you've essentially created a budget that's now working on autopilot. And when it's time to use one of your envelopes, it's pretty simple. Let's say you go to the grocery store. You transfer money from your grocery envelope into your checking account, and just like that, you have money to pay for your food, and you didn't go into debt with an everyday expense. If you plan your envelopes correctly, you can even handle surprises. So let's say you get a flat tire. You can transfer the money from your car maintenance account into your checking account, and you can pay for it with no guilt because you're using the money for the purpose it's intended for. Rachel Cruz is one of my favorite money experts, and she says that a strategy like this gives you permission to spend, and that's absolutely what you're doing. You're creating a budget and setting money aside that is not only okay to spend, it's what you're expected to spend. When I was 14 years old, I started budgeting this way before I even knew that the envelope strategy was a thing. I called it my no surprises strategy. And the idea with this was that surprises are the things that really throw your budget off. But by creating these envelopes, what I was doing is I was making everything feel routine. Expenses never caught me off guard, and I also wasn't surprised when I'd finally saved enough to get something with my meager $6 an hour wages that I had at my local sandwich shop. This strategy allows you to be fully budgeted on a paycheck to paycheck basis, and eventually you stop living paycheck to paycheck. So that's my overview on how to create and manage an electronic strategy, guys. I hope that it was helpful. But if you use a different strategy, that's totally fine. I would highly recommend having a budget to make sure that you're keeping yourself accountable and on track to pay off debt and manage your money successfully. This came pretty naturally to me, but I'm also into math, numbers, and I enjoy automating things as much as possible. It was a great way for me to manage my expenses and also be able to save for long-term things at the same time. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys on the next episode of Debt Free Differently.